The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as Sheriff Sheila tightened them with unnecessary force. Standing there on my own front lawn, neighbors watching from behind curtains and passing cars slowing down for a better look. My humiliation on full display. "I found these in your vehicle," she announced, holding up a small plastic bag. My blood ran cold. I had never seen that bag before in my life. "That is not mine," I said, my voice steady despite the rage and fear coursing through me. "You know that is not mine." She smirked, that self-satisfied expression I would come to know all too well, the one that said she was untouchable, above the law while wearing its badge. "Funny how they all say that," she replied, loud enough for the growing audience to hear. "Everyone is innocent in this town." As she guided me toward her cruiser, I caught sight of my phone on the ground where I had dropped it. The screen was still recording, and that was the moment I realized I was not the first person Sheriff Sheila had targeted, but with what that phone had captured, I was determined to be the last. After 15 years in the city, the quiet streets of Millwood seemed like a postcard come to life. No sirens blaring at 3 in the morning. No need to triple-check locks before bed. The kind of place where people still left spare keys under flower pots and nodded hello to strangers. That was why I chose it, to trade chaos for calm, to reset my life in a place where I could breathe. My routine established itself naturally within the first month. Wake at 6. Coffee on the back porch watching the sun climb over eastern pines. Then a 3-mile walk through winding streets lined with oak trees and well-kept lawns. Always the same route, always the same time. There was comfort in the predictability. The neighbors became familiar faces. Mrs. Holloway watering her prize-winning roses. Robert Patterson retrieving his newspaper in the same faded college sweatshirt. The crossing guard Carl, who always raised his hand in silent greeting as I passed. I did not need many friends. I had left the city precisely to escape the constant social demands, but the quiet acknowledgement of belonging felt right. On that particular Tuesday morning in April, the air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant rain. I turned the corner onto Maple Street, adjusted my earbuds, and noticed the reflection in a storefront window. A white sheriff's department cruiser, moving at walking pace, 20 yards behind me. I continued on my path, assuming it would pass. It did not. For 3 blocks the vehicle maintained that exact distance, not approaching, not passing, just following. The hairs on my neck stood on end, a visceral response from years in the city where being followed was never a good sign. At the intersection of Maple and Chestnut, the cruiser accelerated slightly, pulling alongside me. The passenger window lowered with an electric hum. "Excuse me," called a woman's voice, firm and official. "Could I have a moment of your time?" I removed my earbuds and turned to face Sheriff Sheila Morris for the first time. Her blonde hair pulled into a severe bun beneath her department hat, reflective sunglasses concealing her eyes, a practiced neutral expression that nonetheless communicated authority. "Good morning, officer," I responded. "Is everything all right?" "Sheriff," she corrected immediately. "Sheriff Morris. May I see some identification, please?" My hand instinctively moved toward my pocket before hesitating. "May I ask why? I am just out for a morning walk." Her posture stiffened slightly. "We have had several reports of break-ins in this area. You were observed moving through the neighborhood in a manner that raised concerns." "I walk this same route every morning," I explained, confusion giving way to a slow-building unease. "I have lived here for over a month now, on Orchard Drive." "Identification, please," she repeated, her tone hardening around the edges. "Standard procedure." I removed my wallet and presented my driver's license, updated with my new address barely 3 weeks prior. She took it, studying it with deliberate slowness before speaking into her shoulder radio, requesting a background check. Standing on the sidewalk of this quiet street, I felt a familiar sensation from my city days, the weight of unjustified suspicion, the peculiar shame of being treated as dangerous despite having done nothing wrong. "How long did you say you have been in town?" she asked, eyes still on my license. "Just over a month. I moved from Chicago." "Chicago," she repeated, as if the word itself explained something. "And what brings you all the way out here to Millwood?" "A remote work opportunity and a desire for a quieter life," I answered, trying to keep irritation from my voice. "Is there a problem with my identification?" Sheriff Sheila finally looked up, her reflective glasses mirroring my own confused expression back at me. "No problem at all, just doing my job, keeping the community safe. You understand?" She handed back my license with 2 fingers, as if minimizing contact. "Enjoy your walk, Mr. Reynolds. Welcome to Millwood." The cruiser pulled away, but I stood frozen in place. Something in her tone, in the unnecessary stop, in the way she said, "welcome," like it carried an unspoken, for now, after it, all of it felt wrong. I resumed my walk, but the peace of the morning had shattered. Each wave from a neighbor now carried a new question. Had they reported me? Did I truly look suspicious? Or was this something else entirely? That evening, I researched Sheriff Sheila Morris online. Elected 3 years ago, running unopposed for re-election this fall. A Facebook page filled with community photos and tough-on-crime messaging. Nothing immediately concerning, yet that encounter stayed with me, a splinter under the skin of my new peaceful life. I told myself it was an isolated incident, a misunderstanding, perhaps even appropriate caution from a dedicated law enforcement officer. 1 week later, I would discover how deeply wrong I was. The cruiser appeared again the following Monday. Same time, same route. This time, it did not even attempt subtlety. Sheriff Sheila drove slowly alongside me for nearly half a mile, never speaking, never signaling, just tracking my movements with the persistent presence of her vehicle. I nodded acknowledgement. She did not return the gesture. Wednesday brought the same silent patrol. Then Friday. By the second week, the pattern was undeniable. My morning walks had acquired an unwanted escort service. On the 9th day of this strange surveillance, Sheriff Sheila finally stopped me again. This time, she parked her cruiser directly in my path, forcing me to halt mid-stride. "Good morning again, Sheriff," I said, removing my earbuds proactively. "Is there something I can help you with today?" She stepped out of the vehicle, one hand resting casually near her holster, a subtle posture of authority and threat. "Several neighbors have expressed concern about an unknown individual repeatedly circling the area," she said, loud enough that Mrs. Halloway, watering her front garden across the street, turned to watch the exchange. "Would you mind explaining your presence here again?" The blood rushed to my face, not from guilt, but from the public nature of the accusation. 3 more neighbors had stopped their morning activities to observe the interaction. "As I explained last week, Sheriff, I live on Orchard Drive. I walk this route every morning for exercise, the same route, the same time. There is nothing suspicious about a morning walk." "In my experience," she countered, "people with nothing to hide do not get defensive when questioned." The injustice of the statement struck me like a physical blow. I am not being defensive. I am simply explaining that I live here and have every right to walk through my own neighborhood. Mrs. Halloway had moved closer now, curiosity overcoming discretion. Sheriff Sheila noticed her approach and seemed to straighten further, as if performing for an audience. "I will need to see your identification again," she demanded. "You checked my ID last week," I replied, confusion mixing with growing anger. "Nothing has changed. I still live here. I am still taking a morning walk." "Procedure," she stated flatly. "Identification, please." Aware of the watching eyes, I complied, handing over my license once more. Again, she called it in. Again, she made me wait on the sidewalk as if I were a potential threat rather than a tax-paying resident. "Everything seems to be in order," she finally concluded, returning my ID. "But I would suggest varying your route. Repeated patterns of behavior can appear suspicious to concerned citizens." She nodded pointedly toward the small gathering of onlookers before returning to her cruiser and driving away. I stood there, license still in hand, face burning with unwarranted embarrassment. Mrs. Halloway approached cautiously. "Do not take it personally, dear," she said in what I assume she thought was a comforting tone. "Sheriff Sheila is very thorough with newcomers. She likes to know everyone in town." "By harassing them on public sidewalks." The words escaped before I could temper them. Mrs. Halloway's expression shifted subtly. "Well, I would not call it harassment. She is just doing her job, keeping us safe." I thanked her for her concern and continued my walk, cutting it short and returning home by a different route. The morning air had lost its sweetness. My sanctuary had acquired an unwelcome shadow. That afternoon, I met Jacob Henderson at the local coffee shop, a friendly acquaintance from my first weeks in town. When I mentioned the incidents with Sheriff Sheila, his expression darkened. "She did the same thing to my son last month," he confided, lowering his voice despite the empty tables around us. 17 years old, out for a jog, and she stopped him twice in 1 week. Said he was lurking near houses. The boy has been running cross-country for 3 years. "Did you report it?" I asked. Jacob laughed without humor. "Report it to whom? She is the sheriff, her department, her rules." He stirred his coffee absently. "And my boy is biracial. Not that anyone would say that matters here in Millwood." The implications settled heavily between us. What had felt like personal targeting suddenly expanded into something more systematic and disturbing. That evening, I researched local laws regarding pedestrian rights and law enforcement stops. Nothing justified her behavior. Nothing required me to produce identification for simply walking down a public street. The knowledge brought clarity but little comfort. I made 2 decisions that night. First, I would not alter my routine. I would not be driven from public spaces by intimidation. Second, I would document everything, every interaction, every cruiser sighting, every word exchanged. I ordered a small body camera online, the kind joggers use for safety, and began carrying my phone in my hand rather than my pocket, ready to record at a moment's notice. If Sheriff Sheila wanted to watch me, I would watch back. If she wanted to create a record of my movements, I would create one of hers. I did not yet know where this path would lead, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. This was no longer about morning walks. This was about the abuse of power, and I had experienced enough of that in my lifetime to recognize its face, even behind a badge. The barber shop on Main Street became my first stop in understanding the deeper currents of Millwood. Ron's Classic Cuts had stood on the same corner for 32 years, according to the faded sign in the window. If anyone knew the town's true pulse, it would be the man who had been trimming its hair for 3 decades. Ron Alvarez greeted me with professional warmth, gesturing to his empty chair. The shop was old-fashioned, spinning barber pole outside, leather seats well worn with age, the comforting smell of bay rum and talcum powder. "New in town, right?" he asked, draping the cape around my shoulders. "Seen you walking mornings, Orchard Drive." I nodded, somewhat surprised to be recognized. "About a month and a half now." "Small town," he explained, selecting his scissors. "Everyone eventually passes through these doors, except Sheriff Sheila, of course. She drives to Carlton for her haircuts, thinks it maintains her authority not to socialize locally." The casual mention of her name opened the door. "I have had a few encounters with the sheriff recently." Ron's scissors paused momentarily before resuming their precise movements. "Let me guess. She thinks you look suspicious, walking through your own neighborhood." The accuracy of his assessment startled me. "How did you know?" Ron sighed, his reflection in the mirror showing a weary expression. "Because Sheriff Sheila has a particular way of welcoming people she decides do not quite fit her vision of Millwood." He turned my chair slightly, focusing on the left side. 3 years ago, I put up a hand-painted sign for my son's school fundraiser. Nothing political, just a car wash notice with the school logo, which happens to be in Spanish because it is a bilingual program. She came by that same afternoon, citation book in hand, talking about unauthorized signage and proper channels. "Was there actually an ordinance against it?" I asked. "There was not. When I pointed that out, she suggested that perhaps my business permits needed closer review." Ron's voice remained professional, but I could hear the lingering frustration. "The sign came down. Some battles are not worth fighting." As he finished the haircut, 2 more customers entered, greeting Ron by name. Our conversation shifted to safer topics, whether local sports, property values. But as I paid, Ron leaned slightly closer. "Talk to Linda at the elementary school if you want to know more. She had her own run-in last year." Linda Mercer taught 4th grade at Millwood Elementary. I found her after school hours, grading papers in her classroom, door open to the spring breeze. After introducing myself as a new resident researching community resources for remote workers, a harmless pretext, our conversation eventually turned to local governance. "The school board is supportive," she offered, "but resources are always tight. The sheriff's department gets the lion's share of the budget increases each year." "Speaking of the sheriff," I ventured carefully, "I have had some unusual interactions with Sheriff Sheila recently." Linda's expression flickered with recognition. She rose to close the classroom door before returning to her desk. "Last October, I stayed late to prepare for parent conferences. It was dark when I left, around 8 p.m. Sheriff Sheila was parked in the lot. She followed me to my car, asking what I was doing on school grounds after hours. "But you work here," I said, stating the obvious. "Exactly." When I pointed that out, she said she was responding to a call about loitering. Then she checked my ID and searched my bag of teaching materials, nothing more, before letting me go. The next day I asked the principal if someone had reported suspicious activity. No one had. There had been no call. Linda rearranged papers on her desk, a nervous gesture. After that, I noticed her cruiser during my evening commute at least twice a week. Always there, always watching. "Did it stop eventually?" I asked. "Only when I changed my schedule. I started leaving with other teachers, never alone." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "Sheriff Sheila does not just enforce the law. She decides who deserves extra scrutiny, who needs to be kept in line." Over the next week, I heard more stories. The teenager who received multiple citations for his modified car. The new pastor questioned repeatedly about his congregation's activities. The town council member who suddenly faced zoning issues after opposing the sheriff's department budget increase. At home, I searched local forums and community boards. Hidden in comment threads and between lines of local news coverage, the pattern emerged more clearly. Sheila Morris did not merely patrol Millwood. She curated it, pressuring those who did not fit her vision until they either conformed or left. What had begun as personal irritation had evolved into something more troubling. The individual stories might seem minor: unpleasant encounters, questionable stops, selective enforcement, but together they formed a mosaic of systematic intimidation and control. I needed more than stories. I needed documentation. If Sheriff Sheila operated through official channels to carry out unofficial agendas, then those channels would contain evidence. That night, I drafted my first Freedom of Information request for public records related to Sheriff Sheila Morris. The county records office occupied the basement of the administration building, a fluorescent-lit maze of filing cabinets and ancient computers. The clerk, a woman named Margaret with reading glasses suspended on a beaded chain, regarded my Freedom of Information request with mild surprise. "This is quite comprehensive," she noted, scanning the document. "Complaint records, internal affairs reports, budget allocations, traffic stop demographics. You researching for something specific?" "Just civic interest," I replied with a casual smile. "I am new in town and trying to understand local governance better." Margaret's expression suggested she did not entirely believe me, but she nodded professionally. "Processing time is usually 2 to 3 weeks. Some of these materials may be partially redacted for privacy or security reasons." "I understand. Thank you for your help." As I turned to leave, she cleared her throat softly. "The sheriff's department files undergo additional review before release. Sheriff Morris is very particular about information management." Our eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between us. A subtle acknowledgement that we both understood what particular truly meant. 3 weeks stretched to 4, then 5. When I called to inquire about the delay, I was told the request was under departmental review. Finally, a thin envelope arrived containing far less than I had requested. The complaint files had been heavily redacted, black marker obscuring names, dates, and entire paragraphs. What remained painted a fragmented but troubling picture. 7 formal complaints in 3 years, all marked, resolved internally without specific outcomes. 2 mentions of excessive force with all contextual details removed. A reference to a traffic stop that escalated to physical control measures, deemed within departmental guidelines. Most concerning was what was missing entirely. No demographic data on traffic stops or citations. No information on internal affairs inquiries. No disciplinary records. I brought the redacted documents to Jacob Henderson, who had mentioned having a friend in county administration. He studied them with a frown. "This is even less than I expected," he admitted. "Let me see what my contact can find out." 2 days later, Jacob called me to meet urgently at the coffee shop. He arrived looking over his shoulder before sliding into the booth across from me. "My friend says Sheila's files are unusually protected," he whispered despite the empty cafe. "Multiple complaints sealed by court order, some kind of arrangement with the previous mayor. The current administration cannot access them without specific cause." "That cannot be legal," I said. "Legal enough that no one questions it. My friend also mentioned a lawsuit that was settled quickly and quietly last year. Excessive force during a routine traffic stop. The driver was passing through town, Hispanic college student. No criminal record. Ended up with a broken wrist and concussion." And no one reported this, no media coverage. Jacob shook his head. Settlement included a non-disclosure agreement, paid from the county's insurance, not the department budget, so it never faced public scrutiny. That evening, I spread everything I had collected across my kitchen table. The redacted files, notes from conversations, screenshots of forum posts mentioning similar encounters, names, dates, patterns of behavior emerging from the fragments. Sheriff Sheila's approach was methodical. First, establish a presence, visible surveillance showing the target they were being watched. Then manufactured encounters, stops, questions, mild intimidation to create discomfort. For those who did not take the hint, escalation followed. Citations for minor or non-existent infractions, public confrontations, subtle threats wrapped in official language. The targets varied but shared common elements. Newcomers to town, people who questioned authority, individuals who stood out in some way from Millwood's traditional demographics. She was not merely enforcing the law, she was enforcing her personal vision of community through selective application of her power. Most disturbing was how effectively she had insulated herself from accountability. Complaints disappeared into internal reviews. Records remained sealed or heavily censored. The community had normalized her behavior as thorough policing, rather than recognizing the systematic abuse of authority. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. An unfamiliar number. "Hello. This is David at the county clerk's office," said a male voice, speaking quickly and quietly. "I cannot talk long. I processed your information request last month." "Yes, was there something missing?" "Almost everything was missing," he replied. "Listen, I cannot send you official documents, but there's a case number you should know about. December 2nd last year. Highway 16 incident. The file is sealed, but the court docket is public record if you know where to look." He disconnected before I could respond. Within an hour, I had located the reference. A case filed against the sheriff's department quickly moved to federal court, then abruptly settled 2 weeks later. The plaintiff's name was redacted, but the charge was clear: violation of civil rights under color of law. This was no minor complaint about rudeness or excessive questioning. This was a federal civil rights case that had been buried so efficiently that no one in town seemed aware of its existence. I now had enough to establish a pattern of misconduct spanning years. What I lacked was a platform to share it, one that Sheriff Sheila could not simply intimidate into silence. The solution came to me as I stared at my laptop screen. I did not need the local newspaper or town hall. I had something Sheriff Sheila could not control or censor: the internet. The website took 3 days to assemble, clean, factual, devoid of emotional language or speculation. I titled it simply, "Accountability in Millwood, a Documentation Project." The main page presented a timeline of Sheriff Sheila's tenure, marking significant complaints, incidents, and pattern shifts. Supporting pages contained scanned documents, redacted as received, transcribed testimonials with permission from those willing to be identified, and my own recorded encounters. For balance, I included positive commendations from her file and official statements from the department. This was not a smear campaign. It was a factual record assembled from public information and first-hand accounts. Before publishing, I consulted an attorney in the neighboring county about potential legal concerns. "Nothing here constitutes defamation," she assured me after reviewing the content. "You are presenting documented facts and personal testimonies clearly labeled as such. First Amendment protects this kind of civic oversight." "And the recordings of my encounters with her?" I asked. Millwood is in a one-party consent state. As long as you were a participant in the conversation, your recordings are legal. Just ensure all claims are supported by evidence and avoid inflammatory language. I launched the site on a Tuesday morning and shared the link in local community forums and social media groups. By noon, it had received 300 visits. By evening, over 1,000. The comments section filled rapidly. She followed my son home from basketball practice 3 times last winter. Thought I was imagining things. Received 2 citations for excessive lawn ornaments after putting up a pride flag. Stopped me for a broken taillight that wasn't actually broken. Then searched my car without consent. Each story reinforced the pattern while adding new dimensions. What I had thought was personal harassment revealed itself as a systematic approach to community control. On the second day, an anonymous email arrived containing photos of Sheriff Sheila at what appeared to be a private gathering. She stood in full uniform, drinking from a glass while surrounded by several of the town's wealthier business owners. The message contained only a date, 3 days after she had shut down a local event organized by the Hispanic Business Association for permit irregularities. I vetted the photos carefully before adding them to the site, noting clearly their anonymous source and the context provided. They added visual evidence to the emerging portrait of selective enforcement and community favoritism. By the third day, local blogs had picked up the story. A Facebook group titled Millwood Accountability Project had grown to over 500 members. People were sharing their own stories, adding details I had missed, connecting incidents that previously seemed isolated. Then came the pushback. Returning home from a grocery run, I found an official-looking envelope tucked into my door frame. Inside was a citation for misuse of public records and dissemination of protected information, both featuring vague municipal code references and carrying substantial fines. No officer had delivered it personally. No formal service had occurred, just an unmarked envelope and implied threat. I photographed the citation and added it to the website under a new section, Retaliation Documentation. Within hours, 3 others reported receiving similar notices after commenting publicly on the accountability project. That evening, my doorbell rang. Expecting further intimidation, I was surprised to find Margaret from the county record's office standing on my porch, looking nervously over her shoulder. "I cannot stay," she said quickly. "But you should know Sheriff Sheila was in the office today, pulling your property records, tax information, everything in your public file. She was asking about permit histories for your house." "Looking for violations," I concluded. Margaret nodded. It is her standard approach when she feels threatened. Find a technical violation, then use it as leverage. She handed me a folded paper. "This is a complete list of potential code violations they typically target. Most homes in Millwood violate at least one. Just be prepared." She hurried back to her car without waiting for thanks. The following morning, a reporter from the regional news called. They had found the website and wanted to interview me about the documentation project. Before I could agree, an email notification appeared, a message from the mayor's office requesting a meeting to discuss community concerns raised by recent online publications. Sheriff Sheila's wall of protection was beginning to crack. What had once been whispered in private was now being discussed openly. What had been dismissed as isolated incidents was now recognized as a pattern of abuse. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the citation she had left, feeling something unexpected. Not fear, but vindication. The retaliatory citation proved what I had been documenting. her willingness to use official powers for personal vendettas. Sheriff Sheila had built her authority on isolation and intimidation. She kept her targets separate, made each feel alone in their experience, created an atmosphere where questioning her meant standing alone. But she had never faced organized, documented resistance. She had never had her patterns exposed to public scrutiny. She had never confronted the power of collective truth. As I prepared for the mayor's meeting, I realized this had transformed from a personal grievance into something larger, a community finally finding its voice against long-established abuse of power. The morning walk that had started it all now had a different destination. The morning after my report went live, I woke to 63 notifications. The post had spread through our community like wildfire. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from a number I did not recognize. "This is Mayor Landon's office. The mayor would like to meet with you regarding your recent public statements. Please call to arrange a time." I stared at the message for several minutes. My hands trembled slightly. The mayor. My small act of resistance had reached the top of our local government. I wondered if this was good news or if I had just painted an even larger target on my back. I called the number and was connected to a woman named Patricia, the mayor's chief of staff. Her voice was clipped but not unkind. "The mayor has reviewed your materials and would like to discuss them with our oversight liaison present. Would tomorrow at 9 work for you?" "Yes," I replied, my mouth suddenly dry. "Should I bring anything specific?" "Everything you have," she said before hanging up. That night I organized every piece of evidence I had collected, the videos, the complaint records, the testimonies from others. I practiced what I would say, how I would present myself. This was no longer just about my morning walks. This was about years of unchecked power. The mayor's office was modest, housed in a century-old building with creaking hardwood floors. Mayor Landon was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. The oversight liaison, Mr. Vega, sat beside him with a legal pad. "Thank you for coming," Mayor Landon said. "What you have brought forward is concerning." I carefully laid out my evidence on his desk. The videos of Sheila following me, the records of complaints, the pattern of harassment. "This is not just about me," I explained. "This is systematic targeting. Look at these dates, these locations. She follows the same people repeatedly." Mr. Vega frowned as he reviewed the complaint history. Some of these were marked as resolved internally. Did anyone follow up with the complainants? I shook my head. Not a single person I spoke with was ever contacted again. The mayor sighed deeply. "We have heard whispers about Sheila for years. Nothing concrete enough to act on. People in this town are afraid to come forward." "Because she retaliates," I said. "Look at this citation I received after posting the report. A vague accusation of misuse of public records that cites no actual violation." Our meeting stretched to nearly 2 hours. I answered questions, showed video after video, recounted stories from others who were too afraid to speak themselves. As I was leaving, the mayor placed a hand on my shoulder. "I need you to know this will not be a quick process, but it will be a thorough one." 3 days later, the town council held its monthly meeting. I attended, sitting quietly in the back. Halfway through the public comment period, the door slammed open. Sheila marched in, her uniform perfectly pressed, her face rigid with anger. "I would like to address the baseless accusations being spread about me," she announced without waiting to be recognized. The mayor tried to interrupt. "Sheriff, this is not on the agenda." "I am being defamed by an outsider," she continued. her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto mine. Someone who does not understand how we keep this town safe. Her voice rose as she spoke, becoming increasingly shrill. This person is using manipulated footage and half-truths to attack a law enforcement officer. This is cancel culture at its worst. Small-town politics trying to undermine proper policing. The room grew uncomfortably silent. Several council members shifted in their seats. I remained still, my expression neutral, even as my heart pounded in my chest. The mayor finally stood. "Sheriff Sheila, that is enough. We have received numerous credible complaints about your conduct. This is not the appropriate forum for this discussion." "So you are taking the word of this person over mine," she demanded. "We are conducting a proper review of all evidence," the mayor said firmly. "And effective immediately, you are reassigned to administrative duties pending that review." The color drained from Sheila's face. "You cannot do that." "I can and I have," the mayor replied. "The council has already approved the temporary reassignment." Sheila's eyes found mine again. The hatred there was palpable, raw. She pointed a finger at me. "You have no idea what you have started." She stormed out, leaving a vacuum of tense silence behind her. Later that evening, I received an email from the mayor's office. The subject line read, "Request to speak at special council meeting." The mayor was inviting me to formally present my findings at a public hearing. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The badge still sat on her chest, but the power behind it had started to crack. The day after Sheila's outburst at the council meeting, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mrs. Ramirez, an elderly woman who lived 3 blocks over. I had seen her tending her garden many mornings during my walks. "I saw what happened at the meeting," she said quietly. "I have a story about her too." By the end of the week, 11 people had contacted me directly. Their stories followed the same disturbing pattern. Sheila had targeted a local business owner for displaying a pride flag. She had followed a black college student home from the bus stop 3 separate nights. She had issued multiple citations to a family that had complained about noise from a property owned by her brother. "She pulled me over 6 times in 2 months," a young woman named Tara told me over coffee. "Always the same reason, your tail light looks dim. Never gave me a ticket, just kept me sitting there while she ran my ID, over and over." I helped these people document their experiences. Some filed formal complaints. Others made sworn statements that I added to my growing file of evidence. "Are you sure you want to come forward?" I asked each of them. "She might retaliate." Most nodded firmly. The fear was still there, but something stronger had taken hold, a determination to reclaim their dignity. One evening, I received an anonymous email. The sender identified themselves only as former Deputy J. The message was brief. Sheila kept lists. Officers who did not cooperate were punished with terrible shifts. She maintained files on residents she considered problems. "I left because I could not be part of it. Check her office computer if you ever get the chance." I forwarded the email to Mr. Vega, the oversight liaison. He replied within minutes. "This corroborates information we have recently received from other sources." The local newspaper finally picked up the story that weekend. The headline read, "The Sheriff Who Watches Too Closely, Allegations of Targeted Harassment Surface." The article included redacted versions of several statements and a timeline of complaints against Sheila stretching back 3 years. The reporter, Amelia Chang, had done her homework. She had uncovered 2 settled lawsuits from neighboring counties where Sheila had worked previously. Both involved allegations of racial profiling and excessive surveillance. "We always operate within the law," Sheila was quoted as saying. "These accusations are politically motivated." But the town was no longer buying her excuses. People stopped greeting her at the grocery store. The diner where she ate lunch daily suddenly could not find her regular table. The whispers had become open conversations. A group of residents, led by the barber whose story I had heard months ago, created an online petition demanding a formal inquiry. It gathered over 300 signatures in the first day. Even some of her staunchest supporters began to distance themselves. The head of the business association, who had always praised Sheila's tough approach to maintaining order, publicly called for transparency and accountability. "If these allegations are untrue, a formal investigation will clear the sheriff's name," he said carefully. "If they are true, then we must address them properly." I watched as the foundation of her power crumbled. She had ruled through fear and isolation, making each victim feel alone, making each complaint seem isolated. But now, connected and united, the pattern was undeniable. One week after the newspaper story broke, I spotted Sheila in her cruiser, parked across from my house. She sat there for nearly an hour, staring at my front door. I took photos but did not confront her. There was no need. Her intimidation tactics no longer worked. That night I received a text from Mayor Landon. "Ethics hearing scheduled for next Monday. Please prepare to testify." The woman who controlled the town by watching it was now the one being watched. And her mask, so polished and proud, was starting to slide. The town hall had never been so full. People stood along the walls and spilled out into the hallway. The Ethics Committee, 5 members including 2 council representatives, a retired judge, a citizen appointee, and the mayor, sat at a long table at the front of the room. Sheila arrived with an attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit who looked out of place in our small town. She wore her full uniform despite being on administrative duty, perhaps as a reminder of her authority. Her back was straight, her expression confident, but her eyes darted nervously around the room. I sat with 5 others who would testify: Mrs. Ramirez, Tara, the barber, a local teacher, and a former deputy who had finally agreed to speak publicly. My hands were cold with anxiety, but my resolve remained firm. The retired judge, serving as committee chair, called the hearing to order. "We are here to review allegations of misconduct against Sheriff Sheila Harding. This is not a criminal proceeding, but an ethics review to determine if department policies and public trust have been violated." I was called first. I walked to the small table facing the committee and took the oath. For the next 40 minutes, I methodically presented my evidence. The videos of Sheila following me without cause, the pattern of targeting, the records of complaints. My voice grew stronger with each minute. "She claimed there had been break-ins to justify stopping me," I explained. "I requested crime reports for the area. There had been no break-ins reported in over 8 months. Sheila's attorney interrupted repeatedly, objecting to my characterizations and questioning the legality of my recordings. The committee overruled him each time. "The recordings were made in public spaces," the retired judge explained patiently. "There is no expectation of privacy for an officer performing public duties." The others testified next. Mrs. Ramirez described how Sheila had threatened to cite her for unsightly yard waste after she had hosted a community meeting about water conservation. Tara recounted her repeated traffic stops. The former deputy, James Collins, spoke last. "Sheriff Harding instructed us to pay special attention to certain residents," he testified, his voice slightly shaking. "She kept unofficial files on her computer labeled persons of interest. When I questioned this practice, I was assigned overnight shifts for 3 months straight. Then he revealed something none of us had known. "I have recordings," he said quietly. He played audio from his phone. Sheila's voice filled the room. "I do not care if there is no violation. Find something. That family needs to understand how things work in this town." Another recording. "Keep eyes on the new resident on Maple. Something is not right there. Run his plates every chance you get." The room went completely silent. Sheila's face had gone pale. When it was her turn to speak, Sheila's composure had visibly deteriorated. She stood rigidly, her hands gripping the edges of the table. "I have served this community faithfully for years," she began. "Crime is down. Streets are safer. I make no apologies for being thorough in my duties." Her defense quickly turned to attack. "This is nothing but small-town politics and cancel culture. People who do not like being held accountable are trying to undermine law enforcement." She pointed at me. "This person moved here from the city and immediately began stirring up trouble, questioning methods that have kept this town safe." Her attorney tried to present statistics showing reduced crime rates, but the committee was more interested in addressing the specific allegations of targeting and harassment. "Sheriff Harding," the retired judge asked, "can you explain why you stopped this individual multiple times without issuing citations or documenting the interactions?" "Routine patrol," she insisted. "I noticed suspicious behavior." And what specifically was suspicious about walking in one's own neighborhood? Sheila's explanation grew increasingly convoluted. She cited her years of experience and officer intuition repeatedly. When confronted with the audio recordings, she claimed they were taken out of context. Her voice rose as she spoke, her composure cracking entirely. "You are all being manipulated. This is a coordinated attack on law enforcement." The committee deliberated for less than an hour. Their decision was unanimous. Based on substantial evidence of policy violations, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer, we recommend Sheriff Harding's immediate removal from field duty and the opening of a formal investigation by the State Law Enforcement Standards Board. Sheila sat motionless as the decision was read. The color had drained from her face entirely. Her attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but she seemed not to hear him. As people filed out of the town hall, many stopped to thank me quietly. Some simply nodded. The fear that had gripped our town for so long was beginning to lift. Sheila remained seated long after most had left. When she finally stood, our eyes met briefly across the emptying room. In that moment, I saw something I had never seen in her before: fear. She knew her power was no longer unchecked, and I saw the fear in her silence. The ethics hearing was just the beginning. 3 days later, the State Law Enforcement Standards Division announced they would conduct a comprehensive review of Sheila's entire career. 2 investigators arrived from the Capitol and set up in a conference room at City Hall. They interviewed dozens of residents. They reviewed every complaint, every traffic stop, every incident report Sheila had filed in the past 5 years. They examined the department's computers and found exactly what the former deputy had described: unofficial files on residents who had crossed her in some way. Sheila was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Her cruiser remained parked at the station. Her badge and firearm were temporarily surrendered. The deputy chief stepped in to handle her duties. The first lawsuit was filed 2 weeks after the hearing. A young man named Marcus Williams claimed Sheila had falsified a report about him resisting arrest after she had pulled him over for a broken tail light. The dashcam footage, which had mysteriously been unavailable during his initial court appearance, had been recovered by the state investigators. It showed Marcus complying fully with all instructions. His case was just the beginning. The court clerk told me they had received 7 similar filings in just 10 days. Each one detailed instances of harassment, false citations, or excessive force. Cases that had been resolved with guilty pleas were being reopened as evidence of Sheila's misconduct mounted. I received a call from Amelia Chang, the newspaper reporter who had broken the story locally. "The state investigators found something big," she said, her voice hushed with excitement. "They are not releasing details yet, but my source says it involves evidence tampering in at least 3 cases." The next morning, I opened my laptop to find an email from the state attorney general's office. They requested a formal interview regarding my experiences with Sheila. "Your documentation has been instrumental in establishing a pattern of behavior," the message read. I drove to the Capitol the following day and spent 4 hours with 2 attorneys from the criminal division. They recorded my statement and asked detailed questions about every interaction I had ever had with Sheila. "Will criminal charges be filed?" I asked as our meeting concluded. The lead attorney's expression was carefully neutral. "We go where the evidence leads us," she replied. "But I can tell you this investigation has expanded significantly beyond administrative misconduct." When I returned home, my neighbor was waiting on my porch. "Did you hear?" she asked as I stepped out of my car. "Sheila resigned this afternoon. It was just announced." I stood frozen for a moment, the news washing over me. After all these months of fear, documentation, and fighting, it seemed almost anticlimactic. No final confrontation, no public admission of wrongdoing, just a terse announcement that Sheriff Sheila Harding had tendered her resignation, effective immediately. The official press release from the department cited personal reasons for her departure. It mentioned a restructuring of leadership and renewed commitment to community-oriented policing. Not a word about the investigations or allegations. That evening, a small group gathered at the local coffee shop. Mrs. Ramirez was there, along with Tara, James Collins, and several others who had come forward. We did not celebrate exactly. What had happened was too serious for that, but there was a palpable sense of relief in the room. "I saw her packing up her car this afternoon," James said quietly. "She did not look well." "What happens next?" Tara asked, looking at me. Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Mr. Vega, the oversight liaison. "I thought you would want to know," he said. "The state board voted unanimously to revoke Sheila's law enforcement certification. She will never work as an officer again, anywhere." I shared the news with the group. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mrs. Ramirez reached over and squeezed my hand. "You stood up when no one else would," she said. "You gave us all courage." Later that week, the department announced its new interim sheriff, a veteran officer from the next county with a strong record of community engagement. His first act was to schedule a series of public forums to rebuild trust. 1 month after Sheila's resignation, the state attorney general held a press conference. 3 former officers, including Sheila, were being charged with multiple counts of misconduct, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. The investigation had uncovered a systemic pattern of abuse targeting specific community members. I watched the announcement on my laptop, a strange calm settling over me. The system that had protected her for so long had finally turned against her. The predator had been disarmed by the very people she had tried to intimidate. That night I received a final call from the state board. They confirmed what I already knew: Sheila's certification had been permanently revoked. She would never patrol again. Justice, slow but certain, had finally arrived. The first frost of autumn coated the sidewalks on the morning I resumed my regular walking route. 6 months had passed since Sheila had first stopped me on this very street. 6 months that had transformed both me and our town. I stepped out of my house at exactly 7:15 a.m. just as I always had. The air was crisp, my breath visible in small clouds. I placed my earbuds in, adjusted my jacket, and began walking. Each step felt lighter than I remembered. At the corner of Maple and Elm, where Sheila had once pulled alongside me demanding identification, Mrs. Ramirez was raking leaves in her front yard. She looked up as I approached and smiled broadly. "Beautiful morning for a walk," she called out. I removed my earbuds and smiled back. "Perfect morning," I agreed. "We missed seeing you out here," she said, leaning on her rake. "The neighborhood did not feel the same." I had avoided my regular route during the investigations and hearings, uncomfortable with the attention and unsure if Sheila's supporters might cause trouble. But now, with crisp autumn air filling my lungs, it felt right to reclaim this small ritual. As I continued down Elm Street, more neighbors acknowledged me. Some waved from porches, others called out greetings. Mr. Peterson, washing his car in his driveway, actually stopped me to shake my hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "My son can jog in this neighborhood again without getting stopped." I nodded, slightly embarrassed by the recognition but deeply moved. I had never set out to be a community hero. I had simply refused to accept being treated as suspicious for existing in my own neighborhood. Near the park, I spotted James Collins, the former deputy who had testified about Sheila's secret files. He had been rehired by the new sheriff and was now community liaison officer. He sat in his cruiser, window down, chatting with a group of teenagers. He nodded respectfully as I passed. The sight of a police car no longer sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was how it should be: law enforcement as part of the community, not standing apart from it in judgment. The local library had posted a notice that caught my eye: Community Forum, Know Your Rights and Local Accountability. My name was listed as the featured speaker. The librarian had called the previous week, asking if I would share my experience and the lessons I had learned about documentation, legal rights, and community advocacy. I had agreed without hesitation. If my story could help others stand up against abuse of power, then some good would come from those difficult months. The forum was scheduled for the following week. I had prepared a simple presentation focused not on vilifying Sheila but on empowering citizens. "Silence protects the abuser, not the abused," read one of my slides. "Documentation is power," read another. Our town had also changed in more formal ways. The council had established a civilian oversight committee for the sheriff's department. All complaints were now reviewed by this independent panel, not buried in internal files. Officers wore body cameras. Traffic stops and pedestrian contacts were documented and reported monthly. Perhaps most importantly, we had created an anonymous online forum where residents could report concerns without fear of retaliation. The new sheriff had endorsed it himself, saying transparency would make his department stronger. As I rounded the final corner of my route, I approached the exact spot where Sheila had first demanded my ID. I paused there briefly, remembering the confusion and fear I had felt that day. How small she had made me feel. How vulnerable. I stood taller now. The experience had changed me, strengthened parts of me I had not known needed strengthening. I had discovered a voice I did not know I possessed, and a resilience that had surprised even me. My phone buzzed with a message from Tara. Just saw the news. 2 more cases against her have been accepted for review. This is really happening. I smiled and continued walking. The legal process would continue for months, perhaps years. Justice moved slowly, but it was moving. The system that had once protected Sheila was now holding her accountable. Back at my house, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood come alive with morning activity. Children waited for school buses. People walked dogs. Mail carriers made their rounds. Normal life unfolding without the shadow of surveillance. I thought about Sheila sometimes, wondered where she had gone and what she was doing now. But those thoughts no longer carried emotional weight. She had lost her power, not just over me, but over an entire community that had finally found its voice. Tomorrow I would walk this same route again, and the day after that, head high and proud, reclaiming something that should never have been taken from me, the simple dignity of moving through the world without fear.